Hello, and welcome to Whispered Frames, the pilot episode. We're here to discuss films that ultimately matter to me. And with each entry in this journal, we're going to highlight the films that ultimately left me with questions. Details that stayed with me after the credits rolled. Now, I'm not here to tell you whether a movie is good or bad. And in many cases, my reflection of these films could be radical. In fact, many may not even be the director's intention, the screenwriter's intention. I simply just want to talk about film. Today, for our first episode, we'll be discussing Akira Kurosawa's Ikiru. Now, my immediate reaction, I found myself frustrated with Watanabe, not because he lacked integrity, because even after receiving the most terrifying news imaginable, he remained meek, quiet, humble, persistent. I wanted him to shout. I wanted him to rebel. I wanted Watanabe to demand change, to confront the world with urgency. Instead, he lowered his head and continued moving forward. And perhaps that's exactly why the film stayed with me. Now, the first point that stuck with me, death. At first, I assumed the film was about death. A man receives a diagnosis. His remaining time becomes limited, and he begins searching for some meaning. Simple enough. Yet the more I reflected on the film, the less interested I became in death itself. Death was merely the catalyst, the confrontation, the wake-up call. The removal of our next point, the veil. Now, what fascinated me was not that Watanabe was dying. It was the realization that he had stopped living long enough. He had stopped living long before he received the diagnosis. Now, the bureaucracy, the repetition, the paperwork, the endless procedures, year after year, the exuberance for life had quietly disappeared. Not through tragedy, not through catastrophe. The diagnosis simply removed the veil. And for the first time in decades, Watanabe could see. Now, bureaucracy, that's another part that stayed with me. Most people view the bureaucracy in the film as a criticism of the government. I believe it stood for something much larger in the film. The significance of the bureaucracy is it represents us. The mechanisms we create to delay action, the excuses, the rationalizations, the endless passing of responsibility, the perfectionism, the waiting, the promises, the someday. One department hands the problem to another. One excuse begets another. Year after year, eventually life passes. The city offices became an allegory for this human condition. Now, there's a particular sequence in the film that stuck with me. The nightlife. One sequence particularly was Watanabe moving through the nightlife, the dancing, the crowds, the music, the intoxication, everyone moving together, everyone distracted, everyone searching for pleasure. For a moment, it felt like watching a descent through a modern inferno, not because the people were evil, because none of it could answer the question he was asking. The nightlife could distract him, but it couldn't save him. Now that brings me to my next point. The young woman. Then he meets Toyo, and suddenly color enters the film. She laughs, she smiles, she creates. She moves through life with enthusiasm, and for the first time, Watanabe encounters someone who still possesses something he lost. That childlike vitality, the curiosity, the joy, the exuberance. He isn't seeking romance, he's studying her, trying to understand how she remains so alive, trying to rediscover what he abandoned years ago. Next, the playground. The playground became one of the most powerful symbols in the film. Not because it's a public work project, because it represents life itself. Children running, playing, laughing, living in the moment. When I reflected on the playground, I realized something. The playground, the children, the young woman, it all represents the same thing. The part of ourselves that still knows how to be alive. That childlike intensity, the curiosity, the imagination, the willingness to engage with the world, and the willingness to experience life fully. Now, in order to experience your life fully, you have to be present. Now, the film forced me to ask a simple question. When do we lose that? When do we become so consumed by the future and the past that we stop living in the present? When do we exchange wonder for routine? Curiosity for obligation, vitality for procedure. The tragedy isn't that Watanabe dies. The tragedy is that he spent decades unable to see the life that was already in front of him. The wake. The most devastating part about the film occurs after Watanabe's death. His co-workers gather, they reflect, they admire him, they praise him. They promise to honor his example. They swear they won't allow his death to be in vain, and for one brief moment, everyone understands. Everyone sees clearly. Everyone recognizes their own complacency. Everyone feels inspired, and then nothing. Nothing changed. Nothing changes. Now, one thing I believe that always remains constant, one thing that we just can't ignore, is truth. That ending struck me deeply because it feels true. People make resolutions. We make promises. We set goals. We tell ourselves that we'll change. People swear that they will do better. And often they mean it. Yet, when that emotion fades, the routine, it returns. The excuses return. The bureaucracy returns. The lesson remains. The action disappears. Action. This is why I don't believe the film is ultimately about purpose. Nor do I believe it's about death. It's about action. Everyone understood what Watanabe accomplished, and very few were willing to follow his example. The difference between Watanabe and everyone else is not knowledge. It's action. He took action. He made a choice. Now, like I mentioned before, after watching a movie, I like to ask, what stayed with me? What stayed with me? At first, I thought Ikiru was about mortality, but by the end I realized the movie is about vitality. Vitality. The diagnosis didn't teach Watanabe how to die. It reminded him how to live. The film asks a terrifying question. How much of our lives are lost to the mechanisms we create to avoid truly living? And perhaps an even more uncomfortable one. How many times have I known exactly what I should do and chosen not to do it? Relatable. Now, there are a few questions that the movie left me with. 1. When do we lose our childlike exuberance? If purpose is discovered or created through action, how much of our lives are spent postponing life itself? Why do inspiration and understanding so rarely become action? And what veil prevents us from recognizing the present moment? If I had to summarize this entire film, I would say that Akira Kurosawa's Ikiru is a meditation on vitality, presence, and the tragic distance between understanding what matters and acting on it. Now, Before I go, I'd like to share something. This is my first attempt. I'm not a film critic, and I'm not an expert. This is my first ever video. This is probably the first time I've taken initiative to create something. I'm simply someone fascinated by the questions films leave behind. And honestly, part of the reason I'm making this video is to reach outside of myself. So whether one person watches this or 100, I'm grateful you spent a few moments with me. I'll see you next time. Have a good day.